"Stop lying, Emily," my boss said loudly in front of the entire staff meeting. My coworkers stared at me. I opened my mouth to respond. Then HR stood up and said, "Actually, we should show everyone these emails." My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 33 years old. I work as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing company. It's not a flashy job, but it pays the bills, and I'm genuinely proud of the work I do every day. I grew up believing that hard work eventually speaks for itself, that if you do good work consistently, people will notice and recognize your contributions. In my family, I was always the quiet one, the responsible child who didn't cause problems or demand attention. My boss, Daniel, loved big personalities, people with loud ideas and aggressive sales talk that filled conference rooms with energy. That wasn't me at all. I preferred doing the work well instead of talking endlessly about doing it. Over time, I started noticing something that made me deeply uncomfortable. Daniel had a habit of taking credit for projects I had built from scratch, presenting my research and strategies as his own brilliant ideas. At first, I told myself it didn't matter, that my career was still progressing and office politics weren't worth the stress. I wasn't rich or glamorous like some of my colleagues. I didn't dominate meetings with confident presentations or brag about achievements at happy hours. But I had something they didn't expect, something that would become more important than I could have imagined. I kept records of everything, every email exchange, every approval, every instruction, and that simple habit would soon save my entire career. If you've ever worked hard while someone else took the credit, you probably understand that particular brand of frustration. Subscribe if you've ever been underestimated or overlooked at work. Tell me in the comments if you've dealt with a boss like Daniel, and click hype if you believe truth eventually wins out over lies. The team gathered in our weekly department meeting to discuss a client campaign that had recently failed to meet expectations. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Daniel stood at the front near the projector screen, looking serious and concerned. Then suddenly, without warning, he blamed the entire failure on me in front of everyone assembled. Emily ignored my strategy and sent the wrong proposal to the client, he said with absolute certainty in his voice. I felt my stomach drop because I had followed the exact instructions he'd emailed me 3 weeks earlier. I tried to explain calmly, keeping my voice steady despite the shock. "Daniel, I followed the strategy you sent me. I have the email." He interrupted me before I could finish. "You're rewriting history now?" he said with sarcasm dripping from every word. The room went completely quiet. Some coworkers stared at their laptops. Others avoided eye contact entirely. One person I'd worked with for years whispered to the person beside her, "This is really bad." Daniel pushed harder, building momentum like he was making a closing argument. He accused me of lying to protect myself from consequences of my own mistakes. The humiliation spread through the room like poison. He described me as careless and fundamentally dishonest, someone who couldn't be trusted with important responsibilities. My stomach twisted into knots. I could feel my professional reputation being destroyed in real time, dismantled piece by piece in front of colleagues I respected. I said quietly, trying to maintain composure, "I have the email you sent approving that exact proposal." Daniel actually laughed. "Then show it." Before I could reach for my laptop, Linda, our HR director, raised her hand from where she sat near the back. She said calmly, her voice cutting through the tension, "Actually, we've been reviewing the situation already." She stood and connected her laptop to the projector at the front of the room. On the screen appeared a chain of emails between Daniel and me, time-stamped and detailed. But that moment was only the beginning of what would unfold. The betrayals had been building for months before that meeting, layered carefully like a trap I hadn't seen coming. The first pattern was public undermining that happened so gradually I almost didn't recognize it. Daniel repeatedly dismissed my ideas during meetings, shooting them down with reasons that sounded reasonable in the moment. Then weeks later, he would present those exact same ideas as his own brilliant insights, receiving praise from executives while I sat there remembering the conversations where he told me those approaches wouldn't work. When I questioned it privately after one particularly obvious instance, he looked at me with disappointment and said, "You're part of the team, Emily. Don't be so sensitive about who gets credit. We all contribute." The second betrayal was manipulated blame that started subtly. When the client campaign began struggling and metrics weren't hitting targets, Daniel quietly started telling executives that I had mishandled key aspects of the project. I only discovered this through a coworker named Sarah, who overheard him speaking to upper management in the hallway. She pulled me aside, looking uncomfortable, and told me what she'd heard. "I think he's setting you up," she whispered. I realized then that Daniel wasn't just taking credit anymore. He was actively preparing a scapegoat in case the project failed completely, positioning me as the source of problems while protecting his own reputation. The third betrayal happened during that department meeting itself, the moment when everything came to a head. Daniel pushed the narrative hard that I had ignored his clear directions and made unauthorized decisions that damaged the client relationship. He framed me as irresponsible and dishonest in front of the entire department, people whose respect I'd worked years to earn. "If people can't follow basic instructions, they shouldn't be leading projects," he said while looking directly at me. At that moment, sitting in that chair with everyone staring, it felt like my career might collapse entirely. The walls seemed to close in. My hands felt cold. But while Daniel clearly thought he had me cornered and helpless, I remained outwardly calm, because I knew something he didn't know, something that was about to change everything. What Daniel didn't know, what he had completely failed to consider, was that I had been meticulously documenting everything for months. Every meeting recap sent via email, every instruction he'd given me about the project, every revision he'd requested with specific changes. Not because I was planning some elaborate revenge or expecting this confrontation, but because I had learned something important early in my career from a mentor I'd trusted. Memory can be twisted and reinterpreted. Written records cannot be changed after the fact. When the campaign problems first started appearing and I sensed something felt off about Daniel's behavior, I began organizing the entire email thread into folders on my computer. I saved all the attachments showing Daniel's edits and explicit approvals at every stage of the project. What Daniel believed was a simple blame game, a question of his word against mine, was actually a complete timeline of documented decisions. And that timeline told a very different story than the one he was selling. Every instruction he'd given me, every time he'd approved my work, every moment he'd praised the strategy before things went wrong, it was all there, time-stamped and undeniable. I had a plan he never saw coming because he'd never thought I was smart enough or strategic enough to need one. If Daniel pushed the lie far enough publicly, the truth would expose itself through evidence he didn't know existed, and once that happened, there would be no way to explain it away. A few days before that explosive meeting, I had quietly reached out to Linda from HR and asked for a private conversation. Linda had worked in corporate investigations for over 15 years and had built a reputation throughout the company for being scrupulously fair and thorough. I showed her the organized email records and project files I'd been keeping, walking her through the timeline step by step. She studied everything carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Finally, she looked up at me and said seriously, "Emily, this is a serious situation." She explained that executives had also noticed inconsistencies in Daniel's explanations about the failed campaign, contradictions that had raised questions about his version of events. Linda told me she planned to attend the upcoming department meeting to observe how Daniel handled the discussion. She advised me to stay calm and professional no matter what. Meanwhile, Daniel's confidence grew with each passing day. He started telling coworkers privately that the company was considering disciplinary action against me for the project failure. He spoke about it casually, as if my removal from the team was already decided and just awaiting paperwork. The tension built throughout that entire week. I could feel people watching me differently, uncertain about what was coming. I stayed quiet and focused on my regular work, letting Daniel feel comfortable and secure in his narrative. I understood something important. The more confident he became, the harder and more complete was his fall when the truth finally emerged. In the conference room, after Daniel had finished accusing me of lying, Linda walked to the front and calmly connected her laptop to the projector. The first email appeared on the large screen where everyone could read it clearly. It showed Daniel approving the exact proposal strategy he had just claimed I'd invented without authorization. Murmurs spread around the table immediately. People leaned forward to read. Daniel's confident expression flickered. "That's taken out of context," he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Linda scrolled calmly to the next message without responding to him. It showed Daniel explicitly asking me to send that specific proposal to the client with detailed instructions about timing and presentation. Another email appeared on screen where Daniel had praised the strategy enthusiastically before the campaign even launched, calling it innovative and exactly what the client needed. The conference room grew increasingly quiet as people absorbed what they were seeing. Linda began explaining the timeline step by step, her voice professional and measured. Based on these records, Emily followed every instruction she was given at each stage of this project. Daniel tried to interrupt, raising his voice, but Linda continued presenting the evidence methodically. She moved through email after email, each one contradicting a specific claim Daniel had made minutes earlier. She finished with one final message that appeared on the screen in front of 20 witnesses. It showed Daniel telling me explicitly, "Send this proposal exactly as written. Don't change anything." The exact same proposal he had just called a catastrophic mistake caused by my poor judgment. Daniel's face tightened visibly. His hands gripped the edge of the table. One executive sitting near the door leaned forward and asked the question everyone was thinking. "So why did you accuse her of lying?" Daniel struggled to form an answer, his usual confidence completely gone. For the first time since I'd known him, he had absolutely no control of the room. I sat quietly in my chair while the truth spoke for itself through his own written words. Finally, I said just one sentence, keeping my voice calm and clear. "I just followed the instructions I was given." And suddenly, everyone in that room understood exactly what had really happened. After the meeting ended in uncomfortable silence, the company opened a formal investigation into Daniel's conduct and his handling of the project. Several co-workers approached me privately over the following days to apologize for believing his accusations, admitting they should have asked more questions. Linda later told me that my documentation had made the truth impossible to ignore or reinterpret, that without those records, it might have come down to credibility and politics. Within a few weeks, Daniel was quietly removed from his management role and transferred to a different department with no direct reports. A new supervisor took over our team, someone who valued transparency and collaboration. For the first time in months, work felt genuinely calm again. I kept doing what I had always done: quiet work, careful planning, meeting deadlines without drama. But I also learned something important through that experience. Integrity matters more than office politics, and sometimes the strongest defense isn't arguing louder or fighting harder. It's simply letting the truth speak at exactly the right moment, when the lies have grown too big to sustain themselves any longer. Have you ever been blamed at work for something you didn't actually do? Maybe a coworker or supervisor tried to shift responsibility onto you to protect themselves. Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might genuinely help someone else who's going through the same situation right now. Subscribe to join a community that supports standing up for yourself professionally. Click Hype to help this story reach others who desperately need it. Did this story hit home for you? Let me know by liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Click Hype to help this story find others who felt the same way. Your support makes a huge difference.